Today is November 4th. It's the 309th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. On this day in 1979, a crowd of students gathers outside the gates of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iran. It's not the first time there have been anti-American demonstrations outside the embassy. And when the students climb the walls, it's not the first time that happens either. But the student occupation of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran that begins on this day in 1979 quickly evolves into what we in America call the Iranian hostage crisis. The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, comes to power in 1953, taking over as absolute monarch of Iran in a coup d'etat that is facilitated behind the scenes by British and American intelligence services. Shah Pahlavi rules Iran for the next 25 years until he's driven from the country by the demonstrations and riots of the Islamic Revolution, forced into exile in Egypt in early 1979. On February 1st, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returns from exile in France to Iran. 2 weeks later, a crowd converges on the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and militants storm the gates, taking a Marine hostage in what becomes known as the Valentine's Day Open House. U.S. Ambassador to Iran William Sullivan is inside the embassy at the time. President Jimmy Carter is notified at 3 a.m. Washington time on February 14th, shortly after learning that the U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan, Adolph Dubs, has been kidnapped. Ambassador Dubs is killed in a shootout later that day in 1979. That same day, Ambassador Sullivan surrenders the embassy in Tehran, and British and Danish diplomats in Iran enlist Ayatollah Khomeini's assistance in ending the siege. The following months see growing political and religious tensions in Iran. In April 1979, Khomeini declares an Islamic Republic of Iran, the start of what will be a brutal and repressive regime. In October of 1979, President Carter grants Shah Pahlavi permission to enter the U.S. for medical treatment in New York. Pahlavi has lymphoma, and Carter allows him to come to the U.S. for humanitarian reasons. But that's not how Iranian revolutionaries see it. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians are outraged by Carter's decision. They see it as a betrayal by the president. Demonstrations are held in Tehran on a daily basis. The Shah burned in effigy alongside the American flag. Sometime after 6:30 in the morning on this day in 1979, about 400 to 500 students gather outside the embassy gates. One student is given a pair of metal cutters to conceal in her garments. Security at the embassy is lax on this day. Despite the rising tension and unrest, security precautions and embassy staff concerns are ignored due to President Carter's desire to maintain friendly relations with Iran. This, according to former CIA agent William Doherty, who is in the embassy on this day and one of the dozens of Americans held hostage for more than a year. Soon after gathering in the street outside the gates, Iranian students climb over the embassy walls, break through the gates, and the students rush the embassy building. More than 70 Americans are working in the embassy compound at the time. Several Americans sneak out and into the streets of Tehran. 6 of them make their way to the Canadian embassy, where they're given shelter and hidden for 3 months before being snuck out of the country disguised as a film crew. This is the story of the Canadian caper told in the film Argo. Some of the others who managed to escape during the takeover on this day are caught later in the city and returned to the embassy to be held as hostages. The student occupiers demand that Shah Pahlavi be extradited from the U.S. to Iran to stand trial for his crimes. By some accounts, the students who take over the embassy on this day expect the occupation to last just a couple of days. But then it gets out of hand. in part because no one comes to tell them to leave. Iran's Revolutionary Guards, the elite branch of their military, do nothing to stop the takeover. Iranian TV broadcasts pictures of the takeover live as it's happening, as the students parade blindfolded hostages in front of news cameras. And Ayatollah Khomeini expresses his support for the takeover of the embassy. After only a few days, this is no longer a student action, but a societal issue backed by Iranian leadership. The takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran becomes a crisis of two nations, Iran and the U.S. Before the end of the week, ABC begins broadcasting a daily update news program specifically about the hostage crisis. The show is originally called The Iran Crisis, America Held Hostage, Day 4, Day 5, Day 6, and so on, and it's hosted by newsman Frank Reynolds. The show airs on ABC every night at 11:30 after the local news. It's not too long before Reynolds is replaced by host Ted Koppel, and the show is renamed Nightline, which runs for the duration of the Iranian hostage crisis and then keeps on running as a late-night news program that's still on the air. In April 1980, President Carter, desperate to end the crisis, approves the disastrous rescue attempt Operation Eagle Claw, which ends in failure before it even begins, and with the deaths of 8 U.S. servicemen. Another rescue attempt is planned but aborted before it even gets off the ground, when a C-130 transport plane that's highly modified with rocket thrusters to allow for exceptionally short landings and takeoffs crashes during testing at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida in October 1980. In all, 66 Americans are taken hostage by Iranian students on this day in 1979. 13 of them are released within 2 weeks, and another is released in the summer of 1980. The other 52 American hostages, taken captive on this day in 1979, will be held hostage for 444 days, before being released within hours of President Ronald Reagan's inauguration in 1981. There are 57 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. On this day in 1952, the NSA is formed. The National Security Agency is so top secret when it's established by President Truman that its existence is classified, jokingly referred to for many years as no such agency. These days we're fully aware of the NSA, and they're fully aware of us. And everything we do, everyone we talk to on our phones, and everyone we email, storing every single email you send in their spy cloud in Utah. So if you're still listening, I wonder if the spy cloud listens to this show. Hi, spy cloud. Talk to you tomorrow.